Hey gang, in this tutorial we're going to look at how to explore the interaction between Max for Live and Ableton Live. And so what we want to look at is essentially how to organically explore and poke around and figure out what's possible between the communication between the two. Live already is massively capable in terms of customization and stacking and just doing all sorts of weird and cool stuff. But with the addition of Max for Live, almost anything is possible. If you can think it, you can make it. So what we want to be able to do though is figure out how do we organically explore and understand how those two communicate with one another. And this is done, essentially what we're going to do is what's called traversing the LOM. I'm borrowing from web development where you traverse the DOM, over there, domain object model, using JavaScript. And it's kind of the same principle, but we're going to do the same thing using Ableton Live and Max. And so we're going to call it traversing the LOM. So let's get into it. So to start this off, we're going to start with a basic Max for Live audio effect instrument or MIDI. It doesn't really matter which one you use. In this case, I'm going to be using Max audio effect just to keep it simple. Start on an audio track and clean and simple. So I'm going to pull this over here just so that we have a little bit more real estate. So we've got our Max audio effect down here, and let's go ahead and open this back up. So when we're looking at our Max, and I'm going to assume that you have a little bit of Max for Live experience with this. This isn't an introduction to Max for Live. This is going to be basically how you just navigate through between and communicate between the two of those. So basically, the way the Live object model is set up, if we look at our reference, that we have our Live object model, this is essentially how the object model of Live is set up, basically how everything is communicating towards one another. So we can start with here with our Live app, Live set, control surfaces, and those are going to be our ways to get into the device, or we can also go from the device up and out. And I'm going to kind of use the term bottom down and top down and bottom up approach to this thing. So if we come in from over here, I'll call that a top-down approach. If we come in from the device level and go out and explore, that's going to be the bottom-up approach. And I'm going to go through both those just as a quick example on how to kind of explore organically with this. I found that, but this doesn't really jibe with the way that I think about the layout of Live. It works and it's great and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that there's a lot kind of, I won't say brushed under the rug, but just not really shown here because it's so much information. In fact, if we scroll down, we can start to look at how much information is kind of hidden to us in there. And in the beginning, when I was working with Max for Live, I'd have to spend so much time combing through this list, just combing and combing and combing to find what's capable, what's possible, where it is, how to talk to it. And I found that it's a little bit easier if I were to do this in a kind of slightly more organic way. And that's what we're going to look at today is how do I just explore? How do I look around and how do I get to where I want to get to using the Live object model? So to do that, again, we're going to look at it from top down and from a bottom up approach. But regardless of which one we do, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see everything a little bit closer. We've got our default business over there. So we're going to use essentially three objects to do this typically when speaking between Max for Live and Live. Live.observer, that's going to be how we get information from this. So so I'll go ahead and just put getting, oops. And these are comments that are just for right now. I wouldn't normally leave these in a normal patch, but this is just for example's sake right here. So for setting, we have two objects available to us. We have Live.object and Live.remote. So both these kind of function in a similar way. Live.remote is going to be continuously monitoring, whereas Live.object listens for changes. So this one will likely have a little bit more CPU usage. If you're using signals to do for control, this is going to be the one you want to use. I'm not going to use that one today, but it works just fine. It works fine and dandy, but we're going to focus our time on using these two right here. So if I want to communicate, essentially this is coming from Live to Max, and this is going from Max to Live. And we can of course loop those together and create really interesting two-way communication between the two of those. So part of the deal is here, and again, the main part of this discussion is how do we navigate and how do we find out where we are? So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. To find out, the first thing that we always going to need is a live.path. That's going to tell us where we are in the Live object model. I'm going to go ahead and throw a live.thisDevice on here. That's going to just trigger this thing to output all of its information on the device load, and I'll throw another bang just on top of it just so that I have, so I can manually trigger this thing as needed. And just to confirm, I'm just gonna check out, make sure that this is working, and bam, ID 0. ID 0 is gonna be the dynamically assigned ID that just says we're in the Ableton set. But we haven't actually gone inside of anything anywhere at this point. So to find out what's possible and where we want to go, and so we can choose, again, follow this path, or we can follow the object. In this case, for this discussion today, we can use either one of those. I'm just going to use live the object. I tend to make dynamic stuff that moves around with the object, so I tend to use that one a little bit more. But all right, so what we want to look at first here is let's add a print path, and you don't have to, of course, put path there. It just allows us to denote what's going on in the console over here. So clear out the console, and this is going to allow us to see what's coming out of the dump output right here. So get children to see where we are allowed to start. And what we see here is that we have the children for this are this device, control surfaces, live app, and live set. So if we're looking at a live object model right here, go all the way to the top. We want to come in, and I mean, there's definitely need for control surfaces and live app, or live app, but we're going to come in a live set. And what we want to do is let's start right here. So let's come in here, and again, I'm not going to look at this right here. I'm going to get away from this model right here because I want to be able to just kind of cruise around and look at this thing and explore. So if I want to move down into that, I'm going to use a message path live underscore set, and that's going to drill us down one level down into here. Now we see we've gone down a little bit further in, and this works just fine, but I'm going to look at this from a little bit different perspective. So I'm going to move these up and out of the way, because what I'm going to look at is I'm going to start using live object as kind of my primary navigation tool. So let's add a print object, and again, you don't need the object there. This is just so that I can tell, so it has the tag over here where it's coming from. We can get rid of that later, but for right now, that's just going to be kind of our useful tool. Let's move this over, get a little more real estate going here. Okay, so I'm going to do a get info. This one is kind of your window into everything. So I'm going to add, whoops, added my IDs on the wrong side there. IDs always go on the right side. Okay, let's bang this, make sure that it gets to the ID all the way down there so that the ID is passed through. Clear this out, and we're going to spend a lot of time looking at this console over here to kind of decipher what's going on inside. So again, we're in path live set and get info. Whoa, this is all the cool stuff. So right now we're in one level. We're essentially inside the song, and so this gives us like the ID, which we don't really care. We want to look at the song. Represents live set, so this represents live set. So essentially, the way I kind of think about it is we're just kind of floating around up in here. We're looking at the overall set. We can't talk to any of these individual devices, but we are able to look at and control a lot of, maybe not necessarily the transport, but we can start looking in. And this is where I think is interesting. So we see our children. So if we want to go down further, we can look at our cue points, return tracks, scenes, tracks, visible, or I guess visible tracks, and then over here tells you what it is. So it's a scene, a track, and then we have our properties. So these are the properties. These are the things that we have the ability to either listen to using getting, or we can set using setting here. And this has also gone over in the documentation. But again, I think this is a little more organic to be able to look through and go, oh, okay, I can start to see what I can control here. And then down here we have functions. So functions are things that can be done. And then again, this right now is at the song and the set level. So, well, I wasn't really going to go into it, but let's look at function. Let's do a function real quick. So if we want to call a function, basically you're going to use the message call. Oops, message, not a comment. And let's see, what do we want to do? Let's create or destroy something, or let's say in the functions thing. So if we want to look at create a scene, so we could create a scene or delete a scene, or actually let's do create a return track. That looks kind of cool. So call create return track. What that's going to do is, hopefully, if everything goes right, is create a return track. Bam. Cool. So it created this C return track right there. And simple as that. And kind of the interesting thing here to note is that, of course, I'm working on this audio 4 down in here, but yet I'm able to speak to the entire set. So that's one of the cool things is that it doesn't matter really where you are. It can cause some headaches if you have too many things like talking to the set at the same time, like where the information is coming from. But it is kind of cool. You can create, say, a master module that does all these kind of neat things that control your entire set. So if I want to delete that or undo that right there, I'm going to do, let's look over in my functions and see under my deletes, delete return track. That's exactly what I need right there. So, oops, did it again. Call, delete, underscore return, underscore track. Now, let me move this over here a little bit so we can see it. The thing is, it doesn't know which track to delete. So I have to denote where I want it to go. And in computer speak, everything starts at zeros. So in this case, it's going to be 0, 1, 2. So if I wanted to delete the third return track, which I created right there, I can do return track 2, which is the third one. I know it's counterintuitive, but that's just how computers start counting at 0. And if I hit this one right here, call, delete, return track 2, sure enough, it went away. Cool. That was just kind of a little side note there on how to use functions. Functions you can do some really neat stuff with, some really complicated and responsive behaviors. So let's get rid of that for right now, but let's take a look at what else we can talk to here. So I'm going to clear this out. Let's get rid of the path live set. Let's get the info. So this is what we're looking at here. Again, we're calling this traversing because we're just kind of hopping around, drilling down, moving up. So let's see what can we talk to right here. We got metronome, nudge, root note. So these are all kind of the stuff that's up in here for the most part. We got delete return tracks. We got redo, scrubs. Actually, let's do, those are the functions. I'm gonna say out of functions. Let's do tempo. Let's adjust the tempo right here. So if I want to get that, this is where we have the ability to get. So I'm gonna go over here and hit property. So what I'm going to tell this is, say, hey, I want you to listen to the tempo. I want you to kick this out. So in this case, I want this to go out here. And by telling it, hey, I want you to listen to property tempo, it's going to kick out on the left side here. It's going to kick out a float. If we look over here, it says, where's the tempo? Float. So this is going to be coming out of float, but oftentimes I'll just throw a message box on there temporarily just because if it's not a float, if it's like a list or a string or something like that, the message box won't complain about any of that stuff. It'll just say, this is what's coming out. I should at this point probably change that over to, well, actually, change that over. Bam, now we've got 120. And just to confirm that if I change my tempo over here, if I bring my tempo down, it follows suit over here. So Live Observer is now connected to and listening to the tempo at this path right here. Now, what if we want to go the other direction and we want to control the tempo in live? So let's go the opposite direction. So in this case, we're going to say message set tempo $1, and that's going to allow us to set the tempo over here. And I'll just throw a float on there because it's expecting a float. And if I type in 120, indeed it went up to 120. And came back down to 120. So in this case, what we did is we're going from here up to live, and then from live down back to max. So we have a kind of I won't say a feedback loop, but we have a two-way communication going on right there. Cool. So if you wanted to create, you have the ability to control and create some sort of tempo management system, or if you want to do some ramping or some, I don't know, some weird stuff with it, you could change the measures. I mean, you can do a lot of this stuff over in scenes, but this is ability to do some, if you want to do some ramps, or if you want to do some kind of like at the end of a song, if you want to bring the tempo down slowly over time, you can certainly do that. So that's just one possibility there. What if we want to, well, actually, yeah, so that's essentially kind of wraps up the top-down approach. Of course, we could go much deeper, and we're looking at our children here. If we want to drill down, we can go into the tracks, into the scenes, and we can start doing more manipulation that way. But for this demo, I want to go and talk about more of the bottom-up approach. So I'm going to clean this all up for just a moment, do a little housekeeping. And in this case, let's go back all the way back up to the top. So by setting this back to default. So now we're at the very top, we're outside essentially the live set. And if I say get children, this is where we want to start in. So in this case, this device allows us to start at the device level. And so that's where I want to start. So path this device. And these are what we have. So we're in the we have a max device, and these are what are available to us right here. So we don't really have much going on inside there right now, so there's not a ton of things, but these are the children. So we can look at the device outputs, the inputs and the outputs right here. We can look at the audio. I guess that's really pretty much all there is in terms of children. And then we have what's called the canonical parent. So canonical parent is how you go up, and the children, these other children, are how you go down. So if you want to go up, you use the canonical parent. So in this case, we don't really want to talk this. Well, I guess let's decide what we want to do. Let's start something simple. Let's look at, basically we can control anything live, but let's look at here. We could control pan. Let's just keep it simple and control the slider, the gain slider. So in this case, what we want to do is how do we find the gain slider? Again, without using the live object model documentation. So what we want to do is we want to look over here and we look at, so if it's not already listed in right here, obviously we're inside this device and I want to talk to this, we need to go up a level. So to do that, we're going to use canonical parent. So this device, we're going to go up a level. Drop that in, clear this out, see where we are. Okay, so we're at the track level right now. So we're essentially right here. And these are all the things that are available to us. We'll come back to children if we need to. And what we're gonna look through is property and see if we can find the volume gain in there. Well, actually we have color. Let's go look at color. Let's take a side path here just for a minute since we're exploring. If I wanna look at the color, maybe I want to, for instance, have some of the objects inside of my Max Live device respond to the color of the track. And that can be really useful at a glance if you're hopping through things to make sure that the color, say, of some dials or some objects inside of your live device match the track that you're on. So let's take a look at the color. So let's take a look at color. So what I want to do is look at the property. I want to look at the property of color. I'm gonna, again, because I'm not sure what's gonna come out the bottom end here. So it says property color. Let's see, property color index, property color, it's an int. So it's gonna be coming out as an integer. So I could put an int box there, but let's just keep this just as a safety. We'll throw that on there. Bam, okay. So apparently, what color are we at right now? We're kind of yellow. So the yellow corresponds to 176, 737, actually, this is a weird kind of bizarre color format. It's kind of an unusual hexadecimal format. So in the past, what I've done is I created actually a conversion thing. I found some help off some help files right here. So I have a snippet that allows you to convert from hex to RGB. And if you want to look at this, just to copy it and clone this thing if you wanted to. It's real simple, just hex to RGB. So basically pulls in and kicks out, pulls out the values and turns it into RGB values. In this case, it's dividing by 255, so that means it's going to be normalized between 0 and 1. You could also not divide it by 255 and just get 255 values. So if I look at this, we see that it's 100% of the red, green, and blue. So red and green, it's a lot of those and very little of the blue, which again will correspond to yellow. So just to prove this to myself, if I wanted to say, actually, what I'm going to do is create a panel. So I've got a panel right here, and I want to color this panel so that it matches the same color as the track. So in this case, if I look at the inspector on the panel right here, the interior color, we need to find out what the attribute name is for that. So if you just pull out the attribute, say it's BG fill color, background fill color, is going to be the tag for that. So I'm going to do a POC. There's more sophisticated and cleaner ways to do this, but for simplicity, I'm just going to do this right now. POC BG fill color, and then it's going to be float, 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 and with an alpha of 1. Actually, it should be a float of alpha 1, but and it can respond to either, if I use integers, it's going to be 0 to 255. If I use floats, it's going to be 0 to 1. Oops, not that one. We want this to go to the first float, second float, third float, and of course 1 stays there, and BFG fill color. So let's see if this works. Ta-da, cool. Now, for instance, if I were to say, change the color of this to green, this changes green as well. Cool. So it's always listening. And I could go back the other direction as well if I wanted to, but I'm just want to pull up a quick example on how to use like just the listening kind of thing and looking at the properties. That can be really useful though, again, because it's neat because it'll allow you to start to colorize and stylize your tracks. So especially if you're working with really complex sets, sometimes in the heat of battle you need to be able to look at it quickly at a glance and figure out what's going on. And so color coding to tracks will help program your brain and allow you to move a little bit quicker with a little bit more, a little bit safer. Okay, so let's get rid of the property color here, and let's get back to like our basic object. And so again, right now we're at the track level and we're trying to get to the slider. So I don't see that's in here. We have some functions, so if we wanted to work in there, but like I don't see the input. I see the input meters. I don't see any kind of like gain slider. Even if I don't know what it's called, you can kind of just comb through it, and that's a really good way to start to get familiar with what's possible. A lot easier than looking at that gigantic list that's in the reference doc. Again, reference doc is useful and I use it a lot, but sometimes you just want to kind of explore. And these are dictionaries right here, so these are actually really useful. A little outside of the scope of this discussion, but dictionaries you can do some really cool stuff with. Okay, well, it looks like we need to go down further probably. So let's look at, so we have the devices. That's going to get us back into our Max for Live, or if we have other effects like an EQ8 or some synths or something like that. Actually, this is a Max for Live, Max Audio effect, so it's not going to work with synths and so on. But you could, if you're working, say, in an instrument or a MIDI track, you can do some pretty neat stuff there. But this is looking like a little more what we probably want to do. Mixer device, or yeah, we want to get down into the mixer device. So let's go down one level into mixer device. Mixer. Clear this out. See where we are. We're inside of the mixer device right here. And we see that there's, we can go back up. We have device send. We can look at our sends. We can look at our different panning options right there and our panning modes. So yeah, so that's our children right there. Then this is like looking where we are right here. Oh, so it doesn't look like we actually have the gain control right here. So we probably, oddly, it seems like we need to go down one more level. So child is volume device parameter. So let's go down into the volume. Clear it out, see where we're at. And so we have some automation, some kind of like, I'll say some lesser used stuff, but it's certainly possible to work with. But what we want to look at here is value. This is the one right here that we want to look at. So the value is going to be probably our value. So let's go take a look at this one here. Property. We want to look at the property value. 0.85. Huh. Seems a little odd, but let's go take a look. So that's what it's saying right now, is that we're in this one right here, and it's got a, oh, cool. It's certainly listening to it. So if I bottom this thing all the way out, it goes from 0. If I lift this thing all the way up, it goes to 1. So what this says is this is not in decibels. This is going to be just a normalized slider level. So we could throw some complex stuff in there if you want to work with decibels. You can use a little bit of math or some of that. But in this case, I don't think we really need to. This will work fine for our purposes. So if I bring that all the way down, so that means 0.85 is going to be unity gain right there, and 6 dB is going to, or plus 6 dB is going to be all the way up at 1. So cool. Well, it works. So what happens if I want to control this thing? So on the flip side, I'm going to do set value $1 because I want to set the value. And in this case, I'm going to add, let's just move that out of the way. Let's add a live.slider in there. Let's bring this back on screen a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I want this to conform to the same range as the native range on these ones right here. So, oops. So let's go through and change this from 0 to 1. And we want that to be float values. I mean, it's float behind the scenes anyway. It's just what it's going to display. Actually, let's just get rid of that anyway. We don't care what it's called or what the value is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the value for the object, and by moving this up and down, indeed, it mirrors it. Cool. And if I want to, now I should be able to have two-way communication directly with this. So if I bring this up and down here, or if I bring this one up and down over here, it mirrors it on both sides. Cool. How is this useful? Actually, I've written a few things that this is really useful. What I like to do is I'll oftentimes create Mira controllers and throw these sliders on here to be able to control my Ableton set. There's a lot of different ways you can communicate, using MIDI mapping with Ableton if you want to use interesting controllers using, MIDI kind of controller stuff. But and then of course if you're using OSC, you can do that some of that as well. So you can either but I tend to prefer Mira, and Mira allows you to do very, very quick, simple mapping between the two of these that's really solid. So a lot of times I'll create a master or fader controllers, channel controllers on Mira that allow me to work in a live situation with this. Because sometimes, especially with gain, these little tiny triangles right here can be really difficult to see in a live situation. So I like to have like much bigger, fatter faders that you can really see and have quick access to gain control with very sensitive long faders, and that's something that you can do on a Mira app real quick. I guess just to show you, Mira.frame. So I would just throw this down into here, and that's going to show up as a nice big long fader that you can control very easily with this one thing. And if you want to create entire control, you can do things like panning, color. You can do all sorts of stuff, cool stuff with this Mira controller right here. But we're going to keep it simple for now. Cool. So at this point, we essentially have two-way communication. And if I wanted to, I could put this up into our view so that it's actually going to show up over in Ableton. That will work. But this is looking a little messy right here. So let's go through some techniques to kind of clean this up a little bit. So one of the things that I don't like doing is having this right here, this floating message box out here. So I'm going to copy all this stuff and hard code this into the path. Once you get your stuff set, you're trying to remove all the potential variables. As your patches get bigger and more complex, we don't really need that anymore. We don't need that anymore. Let's move this down under here. We can move this. I'm going to leave that up there. So I'm going to hard code this one in right here. So it says value. So now that's going to be hard coded directly into this. We don't really need to get info. I'm just going to leave it there for just a moment. We can get rid of our getting and setting comments. And actually we can even move this below the line and start working on a better user interface if we wanted to. But we'll just keep it really simple for right now. So I'm going to save this one right here and dummy for experimental reasons. I'm going to replace the one that I've already got there. Cool. So what this is going to do is when this loads up, it's going to pass down this bang just to make sure that the ID gets output to both of these right here. And this one's already going to be listening to the value, and this one's already going to be setting the value right here. So if I close this one out, again, this is a really ugly device, but should work. So we see the fader down here, and we see the fader. We have two-way control and communication. Ta-da! All right, so I guess that completes this quick little tutorial. This is just the tip of the iceberg, the massive iceberg that is the communication between the two of these. But I'm hoping that this kind of demystifies how you can kind of poke around and explore and see what's possible. Happy patching, rock and roll.